Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a case that gets right to the heart of our justice system. It asks a really tough question about a principle most of us just assume is true: that to be guilty of a crime, you actually have to mean to commit one.
18 years. I mean, just think about that. That is a huge amount of time. It's long enough for a newborn to grow up and become a legal adult. And that's the prison sentence a man named Mackle Shelton got in Florida for delivering cocaine. Now, on the surface, that sounds pretty straightforward, right? But believe me, there's a wild twist to his story.
Okay, so what if I told you that to get that 18-year conviction, the state of Florida never even had to prove that Mackle Shelton had any clue the stuff he was delivering was illegal? That's the question at the center of this whole thing, and it flies in the face of centuries of legal tradition.
All right, so let's get into it. To really understand why Shelton's case is such a big deal, we need to quickly go over two foundational legal ideas. Don't worry, they've been around for hundreds of years.
So first up, you've got this thing called actus reus. It's just a fancy Latin term for the guilty act. It's the physical part of the crime, the actual doing of the thing. Super straightforward.
And second, and this is the one you really need to remember for this story, is mens rea. That's Latin for the guilty mind. This is all about what's going on in your head, your intention to do something wrong, or the knowledge that what you're doing is against the law. And here's the kicker. For hundreds of years, the law has said you need both. You can't just have the guilty act, you also have to have the guilty mind. That pairing has been the absolute foundation of our criminal law. It's what separates a real crime from, an honest mistake. But then Florida went and flipped the whole script. They completely changed the rules, especially when it came to their drug laws. Let me show you how it all went down. So, check out this timeline. Up until 2002, Florida's own Supreme Court said, yep, the state has to prove a defendant knew they had drugs. But then, the legislature stepped in and basically said, nope, we don't like that. They changed the law to get rid of that requirement. And just 2 years later, boom, Mackle Shelton gets arrested. He's one of the first people to get caught in this brand new legal world. And when I say they flipped the script, I mean they turned it completely upside down. Look at this. Under the old law, the government had to prove you knew what you were doing. The burden was on them. But under the new law, the burden is on you. You have to prove you didn't know. It's a total 180. What this does is create something lawyers call a strict liability crime. And yeah, it sounds technical, but the idea is actually super simple. It means your state of mind, that whole mens rea thing we just talked about, is totally irrelevant. If you did the act, you're guilty. End of story. Intent is off the table. So, you can probably guess that a change this huge wasn't just going to slide by. Mackle Shelton's case went on an absolute legal roller coaster through the court system. Okay, so let's follow the twists and turns here. First, he gets convicted and sentenced at the state level. He appeals, but that goes nowhere. Then, things get interesting. He goes to federal court and bam, he gets a huge win. The court says the Florida law is unconstitutional. But that victory doesn't last long. A higher federal court comes in, reverses that decision, and puts his conviction right back in place. So his absolute last shot is an appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. So you might be wondering, why did that first federal court rule in his favor? Well, they use this thing called the Staples test. It's a 3-part checklist for when these strict liability laws are okay. And Florida's law? It failed spectacularly. Part 1, the penalty should be small. Nope, 18 years is not small. Part 2, the stigma should be low. Again, nope, a felony drug conviction is a massive stigma. And Part 3, it should regulate something obviously dangerous, like a hand grenade. Well, a bag of white powder just isn't the same thing, is it? So fail, fail, and fail. But the higher appeals court, they just didn't see it that way. Their reasoning was basically that the Supreme Court hadn't been clear enough on this specific issue. So because the precedent wasn't rock solid, they felt they couldn't strike down a state law. And just like that, they overturned the win and put Shelton's 18-year sentence right back on the books. It just goes to show you how messy and divided the courts were on this. Okay, so I know this sounds like one guy's very complicated legal nightmare, but the big idea we're talking about here, it has huge implications for every single one of us and what it even means to be a criminal today. There's this great quote from Supreme Court Justice Robert Jackson. He said that the idea that you have to intend to cause harm to be guilty of a crime, well, that idea is as basic as believing in free will. It's what makes us different from, say, a falling rock. It's what separates a blameworthy choice from an innocent mistake. It's really the grown-up version of saying, I didn't mean to. So why is this more important now than ever? Well, because the number of laws on the books has absolutely exploded. We've gone from a few basic crimes that everyone knows are wrong, like murder or robbery, to, get this, over 4,500 federal criminal laws. And on top of that, there are more than 300,000 federal regulations that could technically put you in jail. It's a minefield. So you take that insane number of laws, and then you start getting rid of the requirement to prove intent. Well, the danger becomes pretty obvious pretty fast. You start punishing people for honest accidents. You chip away at that core American idea of innocent until proven guilty. And you could potentially turn morally innocent people into convicted felons, all because of a simple mistake. All right, so if the courts can't agree and the stakes are this high, then who's supposed to fix this? Who is responsible for protecting this core principle of our justice system? The reality is, the Supreme Court only takes a tiny fraction of the cases that come its way. So if they pass on cases like Shelton's, which they very well might, then that responsibility falls right back on our lawmakers, the people who write the laws in the first place. It's up to them to be careful, to be precise, and to make sure that the government has to prove both a guilty act and a guilty mind before they can lock someone up. And this final quote really brings it all home. It says that if we start throwing people in prison just to achieve some social goal without caring if they're actually morally guilty, well, then prison loses its meaning. Our whole system of criminal law just becomes random and arbitrary. And that brings us to the final, and I think most important question. Is the purpose of criminal law to punish people who make blameworthy choices? Or are we creating a world where literally anyone, you, me, could become a criminal just by making a mistake? The answer to that question is going to shape what justice means for a long, long time.